So I'm excited to introduce Ms. Melissa Stroebel. There she is. Ms. Stroebel is the Senior Program Manager at Thorn, a nonprofit organization dedicated to building technology to keep kids safe from online sexual exploitation. In her current role, Ms. Stroebel oversees Thorn's strategic research initiatives and programming, including the country's most extensive online deterrence program, which I think is part of what she's going to be describing for us today. Prior to joining the Thorn team, Ms. Stroebel worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, conducting research, supporting technology development, and performing victim identification analyses. Ms. Stroebel graduated from the University of Michigan with a bachelor's degree in history, and from George Washington University with a master's degree in forensic science. For several years now, she and I have had many conversations regarding how to move prevention forward, and I'm so grateful that she joins us today. Please help me welcome Ms. Stroebel.
Good afternoon, everybody. Elizabeth, thank you so much for having me and giving us the opportunity to share some of what we're seeing in the prevention space at Thorn. And as everybody else here has echoed, just thank you to the Moore Center for the vision and the passion around this issue. It's not something that we can do as a single organization or a single stakeholder. I had the pleasure of joining some of our other speakers last night at dinner, and how quickly we all fell into conversation that felt like we had all known each other for years, to me personally, because of the commonalities that we share in terms of our passion in this space, our hope for it, our beliefs around it, and a lot of similarities and parallels in terms of our programming work as well. It's actually wonderful that I'm following right on Stuart's heels in terms of the Stop It Now programming, because our deterrence work itself actually points to Stop It Now resources as a place for would-be offenders, adults who are concerned about other adults, or just learning about the issue in general, both pointing to the Stop It Now US page, as well as going to our Stop It Now UK partners, and we're able to work closely with them. I think the common takeaway that we keep hearing today, and Bob, thank you so much for teeing up this quote for me perfectly for the day, is that we can't arrest our way out of this issue. As Elizabeth said, some of my background is from the victim identification space. So it admittedly took me a little bit of time. And even now I find that I have to catch myself from time to time that where my work was at that point in time is after a crime has been committed, a child has been directly harmed, they're potentially going to have ongoing harm from the recirculation of their content. And the very natural reaction, because every day my entire caseload involved reviewing images to facilitate prosecution or reviewing images to identify children. And that was all very much in the punitive mindset and the punitive space, rightly so at that point. But I find myself now pivoting into more prevention work. At the end of the day, we can't be honest with ourselves about the reality of the issue and about the impact of our work and our drive to end child sexual abuse if we aren't actively throwing ourselves into the conversation of prevention. It cannot be. And when you look, if you're looking at it from a research perspective and you want the numbers, we've heard a number of really impactful stats today about the impact of child sexual abuse directly on child victims, directly on family members, directly on their communities, society at a larger scale. If you boil it down from, say, the WHO numbers earlier today, talking about the scale of this issue, if we sought to arrest every single person who had committed a sexual offense against children, there are not enough prison cells in the world to house all of those offenders. So we have a logistical issue. If we are talking about the numbers and trying to say, we can arrest our way out of it, we would need to I can't even put a number on it, how much we'd need to invest in law enforcement investigative resources to have enough investigators to look at all of these cases and to respond to them. At this point, exclusively considering the internet nexus to child sexual abuse cases, investigators dedicated to this work are far outnumbered in terms of the volume of material, the offenders, for those that are dedicated to this issue. And ultimately, the bottom line is the number one. I think we all come back around to, in any of those instances, the crime has already been committed. One child has been impacted, and I think for everybody in this room and everybody, when they're talking about it, that number, it doesn't need to be millions, it doesn't need to be thousands. One is too many. And we have a commitment, we have a requirement as community members that we need to seriously invest and engage in the research that needs to be done, the conversations that need to be had, the programming that needs to be delivered to precede even that single harm. So from my mind, we can't arrest our way out of this issue. Increasingly, we're hearing more and more, not just about the consumption of CSAM in this space, but about youth getting engaged in those cases as well. For anybody who's not familiar with Thorn, we are a tech startup, actually, and a nonprofit, and we build technology to keep kids safe from online sexual exploitation. We've worked in domestic minor sex trafficking. We also work in combating online sexual abuse material. Our deterrence work is one of our primary pillars. It's been with us since we launched 8-9 years ago when we were originally the Demi and Ashton Foundation. And since it was launched, it has seen, I just checked our numbers, we are up over 86 million impressions. Our historical deterrence programming really focused on search deterrence. So what we did was we launched ads that if somebody was searching on the open web for keywords obviously associated with child sexual abuse material, they were presented with ads disrupting their sense of anonymity and redirecting them to support services, viewing this as a public health opportunity, because not all of these individuals have gone so far down the spiral that there isn't an opportunity there to intervene and to prevent harm from happening. Those individuals have gone on. We've seen now almost 3 million visitors to our landing page dedicated to this work. And from there, they have the option of clicking on to get additional help from partners like Stop It Now. And we've seen over 160,000 individuals going on to engage with Stop It Now resources, calling into the helpline, or going on to their resource pages and navigating further to get additional help. Now, when we started hearing from law enforcement a couple years ago about the increase in cases involving kids, we paused for a moment and said, you know what, we think that there's an opportunity here. We think that we can make an impact with a conversation in that space. But all the stories were different that we heard from law enforcement, the different ways that kids were getting involved in these cases. We were seeing pathways about them consuming content, sometimes through seemingly innocent searches online for things like teen pornography. We were also seeing kids who were sexting, potentially in a consensual moment with a significant other. We were also seeing kids who were being actively groomed by offenders, either with the child realizing that it was an adult and a stranger, or in other cases, catfishing incidences when offenders were going online and creating personas for themselves and employing a lot of the malicious tactics that we know them to use to lower that child's guard, to get their trust, and at times to just directly exploit and coerce the additional images out of them. But because of how varied that landscape was, we didn't know exactly the right way to respond to it. The only thing we did know was that the conversation needed to be very different if we're engaging with that youth and young adult audience, and the potential for impact is even greater. We knew both of those things. One of the early pieces of feedback that we received from reaching out into the field, this is a response to a survey I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, about how kids were experiencing child sexual abuse material, was this. The respondent said, "I was exposed to child pornography accidentally in a chat room when I was 9 years old. By 12, I knew something was wrong. I did not want to see it anymore, but I didn't know how to stop. And those in the communities who shared it with me encouraged me to continue. By the time I was a teenager, I was addicted to drugs and alcohol. It took years for me to realize I was not a bad person and needed help since I was exposed to the content as a child." These pieces of feedback for us hit on a number of things. One, kids want the help. They don't know how to get it. They don't know where to get it from. Kids are being exposed at all ages. This child was 9 the first time they saw it, and that was 5 to 10 years ago. So now imagine how much more integral technology is in every child's life. Every child has a device in their hand. The likelihood of early exposure to child sexual abuse material, whether they are looking for it intentionally, knowing what they are looking for it, or not. This type of feedback informed our 2018 deterrence pilot campaign. What we knew was that the messaging needed to be different, the resources needed to be different, everything needed to be a little bit different from what we were currently doing. And in having conversations with partners like Elizabeth and her team and some of the other stakeholders in this space, we all kind of got off the phone of very similar conversations of, yes, this is a problem. Kids are increasingly encountering it. They're intentionally consuming it. There are a number of different pathways. We need to do something. We don't know how to jump into it. And we had a couple of different programs that were in development and getting underway, such as Help Wanted, that was going to address certain pathways within those experiences, but not all inclusive. So what we decided to do was, okay, let's take a step back and do more research. We fielded first a help ad, and this was designed to help us understand, number one, if kids will engage with an online resource, what their level of engagement will be, how will they navigate. But then also in that moment, if somebody has seen something disturbing, we wanted to get in front of it and we wanted to point them to some help services. The second thing we did was a survey to understand their online engagement and if they had ever seen child sexual abuse material. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And then finally, looking at the available resources. Now, this is an example of what our help ad looked like. I work with a great partner back at Thorn who is our digital marketing manager, and she and I always come at these campaigns. We sit down, we really get into the meat of what the issue is, and then she takes my really dense reports and statistics and makes it boiled down, beautiful, and actually accessible to anybody who's not us in this room pretty much and interested in reading 10 pages on the issue. So this was a campaign that she put together for us. www.helpforyouth.org is still up. If anybody's curious, you're welcome to go and take a look at the full page. And this was advertised via social media, targeting teens and just asking the question, have you seen something distressing or disturbing? We directed participants through to different help resources because we knew when we said something as broad as, have you seen something distressing, we could have a variety of responses and reasons why they had. Bullying, suicide issues, LGBTQ stresses, a number of different things. So we partnered with resources including the Trevor Project, Suicide Prevention Lifeline, Crisis Text Line, to name a few, to make sure that there was a pathway for any of those experiences to continue on and get support. We did specifically highlight Stop It Now, and we wanted to carve out this pathway relatively clearly so that we could be sure that the traffic going through to this were individuals specifically concerned about sexual thoughts about younger kids. Now, one of the challenges for anybody who's worked on marketing campaigns and digital media in particular is you need to be really concise. You don't have a lot of words. And so this is what we ended up landing on, having sexual thoughts involving younger kids. Visit Stop It Now to understand healthy behaviors. We did also have a more sex-forward conversation because we didn't know what type of language kids would respond to. Surprisingly, to me at least, they actually were more comfortable with the more broad conversation about seeing something distressing. But what we did want to make sure we did is establish a couple of truths. in that limited amount of real estate on a device. And so what we included in both our landing page as well as the resources that we built with Stop It Now was to emphasize the fact that it takes courage to reach out, that you are not alone, there is help available, but also the fact that it does not matter if that child in the picture is 6 or 16, consuming child sexual abuse material is illegal. So we wanted to hit on those 3 real critical pieces in just a couple of sentences to make sure that we were not triggering anybody, we were not alienating anybody, but we were also establishing a foundation of saying, yes, there could be innocent reasons why you have gone down this pathway. At the end of the day, it is harmful content to the victim and to you. For the survey, we ended up bucketing it into 3 groups of questions. So first, we wanted to know about how they got online, their online behavior. Second, we wanted to know about if they were using the internet to explore their sexuality. And finally, if they had ever encountered what they believed to be child sexual abuse material. We actually had about 2,500 kids respond to this survey, and I apologize, not children, it was 18 to 20-year-olds, so young adults who responded to this survey and participated. And overwhelmingly, not surprisingly, kids were using the internet to explore their sexuality. In terms of what they responded to us, they told us 83% were looking for pornography, 48% were looking for information about orientation, 44% were looking for sex tips and how-tos, and 34% information about safe sex. One of the comments that we heard from a participant was when asking what they were looking for, the question of all of the above, because what they teach us at school is so unhelpful. That was their quick response. Fair enough. I also had somebody point out the fact that we were just a bunch of middle-aged people trying to understand what was hip with kids. And initially, I was a little offended, a little put off, and then I realized I was a middle-aged adult trying to understand what was hip with kids, so that's okay. All right. Factually, yes, you are right. Very perceptive. Thank you. So, yes, kids are overwhelmingly using the internet to explore their sexuality, and frequently they're using the internet to ask questions because either there are people in their lives who are engaged in trying to have that conversation with them and understand their online risks, and they just aren't figuring out how to have the conversation because the talk, irrespective of if we're talking about the digital talk or the non-digital talk, has never been comfortable for child or caregiver. But they're also going online because that's where they're engaging with their community. In terms of understanding which kids were being exposed to child sexual abuse material, nearly 10% of participants reported that they had seen content of a person they believed to be younger than them. So rather than hitting really hard with the language, we asked that question, have you ever seen explicit imagery of someone who you believe to be younger than you, knowing we were targeting 18 to 20-year-olds. We followed that up with a few clarifying questions to understand how old those children were and what the sexual acts were. In most cases, it was a combination of sexual intercourse as well as nudity. And the majority of kids did say that they were seeing content of most likely 14 to 17-year-olds, but also a large majority, you see here, this dark section was 11 to 13-year-olds. They believed the child to be in the picture. And these sections here, about 11% thought the child was between the age of 4 and 10, and 2% believed the child to be under 4. So there's a number of concerns coming out of this information. The fact that these kids are being exposed to illegal material, the fact that they're being exposed to really extreme material in these younger age ranges. And then in terms of understanding what bothered them about it, if it bothered them, because that was one of the things we needed to understand was, are they reacting in such a way? Do they think that that material is bad? Do they recognize there's anything harmful? The majority did realize it was harmful, about 76%. Of those who didn't think there was anything wrong with them looking at the content, they weren't bothered by it, the majority did report that it was content of what they believed to be a teenager. And that was important for us to recognize and to understand that the majority of kids who are encountering CSAM online are not intentionally seeking it out because they are developing that sexual attraction to much younger kids. They're encountering it through relatively normative sexual exploration. Now, that doesn't negate some of the inherent harms that can come from engaging with that material online, but respecting that pathway in as not being obviously harmful or malicious is important from a prevention standpoint and our further messaging. We did also ask what portion of participants knew that the content was illegal. Now, the caveat for all of this is we know we've got some sampling issues. If we're asking if you've looked at this material, we're probably getting an overabundance of people saying, yes, potentially, or conversely, no, I didn't know it was illegal, that's my out. When we asked them if they thought others knew it was illegal, well, only 1 in 5 said they didn't know. They thought 72% of other kids would not know that it was illegal to look at it. So that's an area we need to dive into a little bit more to understand kind of what that is and if there's a messaging opportunity within that from a prevention standpoint. One respondent said, even though it bothered me, I still watched it. Intrigued by how there could be porn of an underage person. In my porn addiction, I needed new, more scandalous porn to get me to feel the same way that I felt with my first watching of porn. Another person responded that we asked what they did when they saw it. They said they just closed the window and navigated away because it really wasn't my business and why should I do anything about it? So, a number of things bubbling up out of this and a number of possibilities. The biggest takeaway, though, is that kids are using the internet to explore their sexuality, and this is both a vulnerability and an opportunity from a prevention perspective in terms of online sexual abuse of kids. Kids are going to use tech to understand their sexuality and to explore their sexuality and to engage with their communities. They also are experiencing quite a bit of isolation and shame, and for a number of different reasons, the things that they encounter online can compound that isolation or shame, or simultaneously, it could be the community that they weren't able to find offline. Kids are also going to engage. If you meet them where they are, they want the information, they want to connect, they want to learn. And it's a question of if they're going online to look for information about sexual experiences, whether good or bad, they're going to connect with someone. And the question is it going to be us and positive social influences, or is it going to be bad actors who are intentionally going to those same places to exploit those vulnerabilities? So moving forward, and I know I need to wrap up here, what youth programming is going to look like for us moving ahead. We're really going to double down on youth-centric programming and early interventions. The idea will be focusing on reducing vulnerabilities and increasing resiliency. At the end of the day, what we recognize is that the effective prevention programming needs to arm kids and community members with an understanding of what those threats are, as well as activating protective sources to prevent both online and offline harms. The absence of this means we're going to have more cases of grooming, more cases of sextortion, and inadvertent exposure to CSAM, which comes with a number of varied harms. We're breaking it down into research and campaigns. Our research is going to focus on a number of emerging threats that we recognize, such as grooming and understanding how that manifests and understanding how kids experience it. And with campaigns, what's the best audience to reach first? We want to make sure that the campaigns are targeting those who want to engage with them. One of the things that we have quickly come to understand just in doing the lit reviews and the field audits is that the protective influences are really all over the place in terms of what knowledge they're working on, their level of engagement, their availability for engagement. And so that seems to be a little bit of a wild card. In some cases, we even know that some school programming and some other programming, it's actually harmful, and it's exacerbating some of these vulnerabilities by further isolating kids and sending them online for information that is better to what they need to hear and better to what they need to know at that point. So where that brings us is ultimately the youth audience. That'll be our first priority moving forward, because you take all the other factors out of the mix, the common thread is that the kids, in the absence of information coming from an external source, they're going to go find it. And so our goal is to get in front of them so that they are getting the positive influences and hear directly about what they need to know to stay safe online, rather than them encountering bad actors when they go looking for it. Next up, after that, we'll start trying to do more with the caregivers and educators and the other communities. But first at bat is definitely reaching kids and understanding their needs. And that is what's rolling us into our next round of research. We're going to be doing focus groups and surveys and continuing to partner with other experts in this field, such as our team members at Stop It Now and Help Wanted and here at the Moore Center, to understand from kids specifically how they're experiencing some of these things. What does grooming mean to them? What does self-generated content mean to them? We need to respect the fact that for some, sexting is a normal part of growing up now. And we can't just come in and say, don't do it, without respecting why they're engaging in it, and to help them understand, okay, if it's something you did last night with your boyfriend, all of a sudden there are different things at play when you're going online to engage with images of that content. But we need to meet them where they are, and we need to understand what questions they have and where they need to be headed. That is everything I have for you today, and I think I only ran over by a little.